Hi, this is Colleen. I want to talk about politics in the workforce. Organizations have always come down to politics when dealing with pressure and money. Sometimes big organizations, want to do things, and it all boils down to board members and number of votes. Sometimes this could hurt a organization depending on how big it is because they're not thinking about the workers, they're thinking about the benefits of the company. I know you have to think about the benefits of the company, but sometimes it's good to have an all-around view of everything that's going on. Politics also comes into play in small businesses too. Sometimes small businesses need the money to stay afloat, especially with the pandemic going on. They basically have to compromise their business sometimes just to stay open. And I know that was hard during the pandemic. A lot of things come down to power and how organizations want to do things in a whole spectrum, and looking at the company. Sometimes they just think about, okay, what are the board members going to say? They're not thinking about the actual individual and how it's going to affect the workers, and sometimes that could cause conflict in companies. But also, on saying that, on the other hand, sometimes board members think about everything. They talk it over and see how things are going to be played out and how things are going to affect the whole organization instead of just making decisions. I feel like sometimes politics can ruin things and sometimes it can be good for things. Sometimes when people are in a bind and need financial backing, they may do things to basically get the cash in hand, and they might cut workers or they might not think about the whole aspect. Sometimes I feel like you have to think about the whole aspect. But like I said before, sometimes board members do think about everyone on the whole and make right decisions for the company. Politics isn't everything, from regular politics to business politics. Sometimes business politics are kind of more harsher because companies have to think about staying afloat. And when you have to stay afloat, you kind of, sometimes your judgment can be off a little bit, and you're just thinking about keeping the business open. But on the other hand, you have to also think about how things are going to flow after you make that decision. At times, people make rash decisions and say, okay, I'm just going to do this to keep the company open. Sometimes people don't read contracts. Sometimes people don't sit and say, okay, let's really think about this and really think about taking our time and making a decision. And I feel in business, you have to always think about everything on a broad spectrum instead of just at the moment. Because sometimes when you make decisions just at the moment, you find that it's the wrong decision. Sometimes you need to sit with the decision for a couple of days and say, okay, is this the right decision for the company? Is this the right decision for the organization? Because we're playing with people's lives here and how the company runs on a whole. And in business, you have to think about that. There's a lot of things that go into business. I know sometimes when companies have been open for like 100 years and they're just thinking about, okay, how can we get the company to the next level, and not really thinking about how the companies ran. And sometimes people don't even sit with the workers and ask them questions and ask them how the company can be ran better or what decisions can be made. I feel like employees help run companies. It's not just a political thing. I feel like employees make businesses run and keep businesses afloat. So you have to think about them too. You can't just say, okay, let's see how this is going to be for the organization. As a company as a whole, you have to think about everybody, not just a rash decision. And I feel like sometimes that's where politics gets blurred, and companies may say, okay, let's just do what's best for the company. Let's not think about the broad spectrum, which you have to think about the broad spectrum and how things are going to affect the company. Power is such a crazy thing, because I feel like power sometimes could have people's judgment off. And I think people don't realize how power could destroy a company and make people lose their judgment. Politics are going to be everywhere at every time, but I think you have to know what you're doing and when it comes to business and politics, because sometimes things can get a little sketchy. A lot of organizations have gone down because people want to do schemes and make rash decisions and take all the money and run with it. And they don't realize that people are working every day and that's affecting their everyday life. And I feel like when it's affecting somebody's everyday life, when people lose everything, just like people lose everything when they invest their 401k in a company that's not good, or Ponzi schemes, or stuff that does not, that people are undermining behind the scenes. And I feel like that's not a good thing. I feel like sometimes people need to do their research on many different levels and not just come up and say, okay, let's just put our money here or let's put our money in this company. Sometimes you really have to research a company. I mean, people might not understand everything about how companies run or how politics go, but I think you should at least understand the the basics so it could help you from getting thrown off. And I think people really need to sit with decisions instead of just making it a rational thing. Politics could be good for a business and politics could be bad for a business. And I think companies really need to take in perspective everything. I'm not saying all companies don't do that. I feel like successful companies do that, because I feel like the board members, once they agree on everything and once they say, okay, we have a decision and this is going to benefit not just the board members and not just who's sitting on the board, but it's a good decision for the whole company, I feel like it will run more effectively. And I feel like it can basically be a benefit. Everybody wants to work for a company that's basically going to be thinking about them, not just the company on a whole. Because without workers, your company can't run and can't be successful. Politics has been around for many years. Some of the best companies have folded because they make rash decisions and power gets to people's heads sometimes. And when it's too late, then they realize, okay, this is this was a crazy decision. I mean, you live and you learn with everything in life. I feel like sometimes people don't really sit with their decisions. And I think when people get hired for a company, I think they should do their research too before. Even when you interview, sometimes people just want to get the job and say, okay, I got the job just to get money coming in. And I know I've been guilty of that and not really done my research and find out, okay, is this company going to benefit me? Because at the end of the day, everybody wants to work for a company that benefits them and benefits how the company is structured and how it's ran. So I feel like people really need to think about how they're hiring, and people really need to think about what companies they're going into. Do their research, because sometimes people are so excited to get a job, they don't do their research and find out it's not the right company for them, or find out that the politics in the company they're not happy with. I mean, how many people have worked for a company for many years and don't agree with the politics but still work for it? I feel like you have to have a balance with everything in life. And if you can't sit up there and say, okay, is this going to benefit me? Am I going to be happy here? How is the politics here? I know there's a lot of politics, especially when new management takes over. Sometimes people are not happy with it, and sometimes organizations just do things, but I think it should be a balanced scale. Resources come into play with that too. Sometimes money gets taken under the table or whatever the case may be, and then the company folds. And even in small businesses, sometimes people don't read the contracts and say, okay, well, how is this going to affect me? I'm a small business. I need to know what's going on. I need to know before I sign it. Some people just sign things and don't realize the politics behind things. And I think politics comes becomes a very important topic in everything. We already know how politics goes on a political level, but sometimes politics underneath business could be a little tricky also. So just finding out how things are ran before you jump into a situation, and also find out the politics of the company, if you could deal with it or not. That will basically help you realize how things are going to run on a day-to-day operations, because you can work for a company and not agree with their politics. Thank you.